What would you do if you discovered your spouse had stolen nearly $100,000 from you while you were serving your country overseas? Well, buckle up, because today I'm sharing the most incredible true story of betrayal, federal crimes, and the most epic revenge you'll ever hear. This story will literally make your jaw drop, and by the end, you'll understand why karma is the ultimate force of justice in this world. Picture this scene. It's 3 in the morning in a cramped military barracks in Bavaria, Germany. The base is quiet, except for the distant hum of generators and the occasional footsteps of night patrol. Valerie Morgan, a 35-year-old Army logistics officer, is jolted awake by her phone, buzzing insistently on her nightstand. She's exhausted from coordinating supply chains and managing complex military operations that keep American forces operational across Europe. But something tells her to check the message. What she sees on her screen will haunt her forever and change the course of her entire life. The message glows mockingly in the darkness. "My new girlfriend and I just bought a place together with your savings. She's everything you'll never be." Attached is a photo that feels like a knife to the heart. Her husband, Darren, grinning like he's won the lottery, standing next to a blonde woman who looks barely out of college. Both of them are holding a sold sign in front of a beautiful 2-story house with a wraparound porch that Valerie has never seen before in her life. But here's the thing that makes this even more devastating. It's the exact style of house she and Darren had talked about buying together. The wraparound porch she'd dreamed of since childhood. He'd taken their shared vision and twisted it into his ultimate betrayal. Now most people would probably break down crying or start screaming. But Valerie isn't most people. She's a trained military officer who's spent years making life or death decisions under pressure. She's coordinated supply chains that keep soldiers alive, managed logistics operations that span continents, and handled crises that would break most civilians. Instead of falling apart, something cold and calculating takes over. She sets the phone down carefully, her hands steadier than they have any right to be, and starts planning her next move. Here's what makes this story absolutely insane. For 6 months, Valerie had been religiously sending $2,000 every single month to their joint account. This wasn't just random money she was throwing around. This was carefully saved deployment pay that had two very specific purposes: helping her parents retire comfortably after a lifetime of hard work, and serving as a down payment for the dream home she and Darren had planned to buy together when she returned from Germany. Every dollar represented sacrifice. Every transfer represented trust. Every month, she'd go without luxuries, skip expensive meals, and live frugally so she could build a future for her family. But while Valerie was eating military rations and sleeping in a basic barracks, serving her country thousands of miles from home, her unemployed husband was living like a millionaire in Austin, Texas, and he was doing it all with her money. The irony was devastating. She was sacrificing her comfort to serve her country, while her husband was betraying everything she stood for. The photos Darren had been sending over the past few weeks suddenly made sickening sense. There he was at expensive restaurants that cost more than Valerie's weekly food budget, steakhouses she'd never heard of, wine bars that charged more for a bottle than she spent on groceries in a month. There he was buying luxury wine that probably cost more than her monthly phone bill. Shopping trips where his young girlfriend's arms were loaded with designer bags that represented weeks of Valerie's careful saving. Each image felt like a deliberate slap, designed to show her how much better his life had become without her. But here's where Valerie's military training kicks in. Instead of responding emotionally, she remembers something crucial. About a month earlier, she'd received a fraud alert from their bank. Something about unauthorized access attempts and signature verification issues. At the time, she was coordinating a massive supply shipment that was critical to operations across 3 different bases. She was working 18-hour days, managing hundreds of personnel, and dealing with logistics nightmares that could have compromised military readiness. She'd assumed the bank alert was just a system glitch and made a mental note to investigate later. But later never came because the demands of her job never stopped. Now she realizes it was anything but a glitch. It was the first sign that her entire life was being systematically destroyed by the person she trusted most. The next morning, Valerie walks into the JAG legal office and sits across from Captain Patricia Weber, a sharp-eyed lawyer in her 40s who has seen enough military spouse betrayals to fill a handbook. The office smells of burnt coffee and determination, and Patricia's expression tells Valerie that she's dealt with this exact scenario more times than she'd care to count. When Valerie shows her the photos and messages, Patricia's expression hardens immediately. "Tell me everything," Patricia says, and Valerie does. The whole story pours out. The $45,000 in their joint savings account that had taken her 18 months to accumulate, the 2 years of careful deployment saving, where every dollar was accounted for, the trust that had been shattered with a single text message, the unemployment that Darren had been hiding behind while systematically draining their future. But here's where things get really interesting. Patricia makes a phone call that changes everything. Within an hour, Valerie is sitting with a team of specialists, including Sergeant Rodriguez from Financial Crimes, who specializes in military spouse fraud cases. His first words are both comforting and terrifying. "This happens more than you'd think. Deployed service members are particularly vulnerable. The distance, the time zones, the trust we place in our families, it creates perfect conditions for financial abuse." The investigation that follows reveals a level of betrayal that's almost impossible to believe. It turns out Darren hasn't just been spending Valerie's money carelessly. He's been systematically draining their accounts for months, using a pattern that financial experts recognize as classic financial abuse, starting with small amounts that wouldn't trigger alerts, 300 here, 500 there, then gradually increasing until he was stealing hundreds of dollars at a time. The victim doesn't notice until it's too late. Restaurant charges at places Valerie had never heard of, online purchases for electronics, clothing, and jewelry, cash advances happening almost weekly. The total, nearly $80,000 in debt opened in Valerie's name without her knowledge or consent. Credit cards she didn't know existed, opened using her social security number and forged signatures. He'd been funding expensive dinners, weekend trips, and even bought his girlfriend a car while Valerie was living on base meals and sending every spare dollar home. But the house purchase is where Darren really crossed the line into federal crime territory. To buy that dream home, he needed to show stable income and a substantial down payment. So he did what any rational person would do. He forged his deployed wife's signature on mortgage documents and claimed she was a willing co-purchaser. The level of planning involved was staggering. The forensic accountant discovers that Darren had created an elaborate web of lies. He'd misrepresented Valerie's deployment as a temporary assignment, suggesting she'd be returning to Texas permanently within months. He'd told the mortgage company that she was actively participating in the house hunt via video calls and had given him power of attorney for the closing. He'd even provided fake employment verification letters claiming Valerie worked for a consulting firm in Austin, complete with bank statements showing joint income that didn't exist. There's just one problem with that story. The power of attorney doesn't exist. Every single document he signed was a forgery, and every representation he made was fraud. When investigators dig deeper, they find that Darren used an old letterhead template he probably downloaded online, and the supposed commanding officer's signature was just a Google image of a military signature. Any real verification would have caught it immediately. Here's where the story takes an even more incredible turn. The girlfriend, Tiffany, wasn't just some naive young woman who got swept up in Darren's lies. She was an active participant in the fraud scheme. She had signed documents claiming to personally know Valerie and confirming her consent to the purchase. The problem: she'd never met Valerie in her life. Moreover, she'd actively helped forge documents, and investigators found text messages between them planning how to make the fake paperwork look legitimate. But wait, it gets worse. The investigation reveals that this wasn't just about one cheating husband and his girlfriend. Tiffany was actually the mastermind behind an entire military spouse fraud operation. Her real name was Tiffany Rodriguez, and she'd been using multiple identities to run romance scams for years. The Instagram fitness coach persona was completely fake, designed to attract men like Darren, who were feeling insecure about their wife's success. She had specifically targeted Valerie and other military wives because their deployment schedules made them perfect victims. They were too busy with critical military operations to monitor their accounts closely, and the time zone differences made communication challenging. She'd researched military spouse fraud techniques online and was looking for someone with access to deployed partners. She'd approached Darren after meeting him at a bar 6 months earlier, not out of love, but as part of a calculated plan to steal from military families. The investigators find files on 3 other women whose husbands are deployed, complete with forged documents and stolen financial information. All logistics or supply officers like Valerie, all deployed to locations with challenging communication schedules. The total fraud across all victims, over $200,000. But here's the most disturbing part. Tiffany was planning to disappear once they'd stolen enough money to buy the house outright. The mortgage was just a temporary step. She intended to refinance or sell quickly, take her share, and move on to the next target. Now comes the most satisfying part of the entire story. Darren and Tiffany are scheduled to complete their house closing the next morning at 10 a.m. Texas time. But instead of walking into their dream home purchase, they're walking into a federal sting operation. The Service Members Civil Relief Act gives deployed military personnel significant legal protections, and Darren had violated every single one of them. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and violations of military protection laws. The charges were piling up like a legal avalanche. Picture this scene. Darren and Tiffany stroll into the title company, probably feeling like they've pulled off the perfect crime. Darren is actually bragging to Tiffany about how easy it had been to access Valerie's money, saying that military wives were too trusting and stupid to notice anything. The arrogance is breathtaking. Here's a man whose wife is serving overseas, keeping him safe, and he's not only betraying her, but mocking her sacrifice. What they don't know is that federal investigators are recording every word from a conference room adjacent to the closing office. When the title company representative tells them there's a problem with the signatures, Darren gets belligerent. He starts yelling about how his wife is deployed and can't be expected to come in person for every little detail. The entitlement is staggering. He's committing federal crimes and acting like he's the victim. That's when Officer Janet Martinez from Service Member Civil Relief introduces herself and explains that forging a deployed service member's signature on financial documents is a federal crime. The look on Darren's face when reality hits him is apparently priceless. All that arrogance melts away in an instant as he realizes the magnitude of what he's done. He tries to deny everything at first, claiming Valerie had given him permission for all of it. But when Martinez asks him to produce the power of attorney documentation, he can't do it because it doesn't exist. That's when he realizes how much trouble he's in. The title company had to call their legal department immediately because when they ran the verification checks that morning, checks they should have done weeks ago, half the documents didn't match their security protocols. Meanwhile, Tiffany starts crying and claiming she didn't know any of this was illegal, but the investigators have already found text messages between her and Darren, planning how to make the fake paperwork look legitimate. They've also discovered her social media posts, bragging about spending Valerie's money with captions like, "When your man knows how to provide." She documented their entire fraud scheme thinking it made her look successful, not realizing she was creating evidence of federal crimes. The arrest is captured on the title company's security cameras, and according to investigators, Darren completely loses it when he realizes the scope of the charges. He starts screaming that Tiffany had lied to him about everything, that he thought Valerie had given permission for the house purchase. Even when caught red-handed, he's still trying to blame everyone else for his choices. But here's the most satisfying part of the entire takedown. When federal agents search their apartment, they find evidence that this fraud operation was even bigger than anyone realized. Files on other military families, forged documents, and stolen financial information. The U.S. Attorney's Office becomes very interested because military spouse fraud is a priority for them, especially when it involves forged documents and identity theft. The final results are everything Valerie could have hoped for, and more. Darren is sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, plus 5 years probation, with full restitution of $93,000 to Valerie, including penalties and interest. The prosecutor specifically recommends a harsh sentence because military spouse fraud undermines national security by targeting service members' families. Tiffany gets 7 years in federal prison with no early release eligibility and has to pay restitution to all victims across multiple states. The judge specifically mentions that her predatory targeting of military families makes her crimes particularly heinous. She's been running romance scams and military spouse fraud for over 2 years, destroying families and stealing from people who serve their country. The house sale is voided, and Valerie's money is recovered from the escrow account. The other military spouses who were targeted get full restitution too, including one woman who had her entire deployment savings of $28,000 stolen. Thanks to Valerie's case, several families are saved from financial ruin. But here's the final twist that makes this story absolutely perfect. Months later, Darren has the audacity to send a letter from prison asking for Valerie's forgiveness. He wants to apologize and ask for her understanding when he gets out. The letter is filled with self-pity and excuses, claiming he was also a victim of Tiffany's manipulation. He still doesn't understand that his choices destroyed their marriage and hurt multiple families. Valerie's response: tell him I'm too busy building my real future to waste time on his fantasy of redemption. By the time Valerie's deployment ends, she's a different person. The betrayal that could have destroyed her instead revealed her strength. She returns to the United States with full restitution, a clean financial slate, and the knowledge that she helped protect other military families from the same devastating fraud. While Darren and Tiffany are serving hard time in federal prison, Valerie is building the life she actually deserves. This story proves that sometimes the worst betrayal can become the catalyst for the most incredible comeback. Justice isn't always swift, but when it comes, it's often more complete than we could have imagined. Valerie didn't just get her money back, she got her life back, her self-respect back, and the satisfaction of knowing that the people who tried to destroy her are facing the consequences of their actions every single day behind bars. What do you think? Did they get what they deserved? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this incredible story of justice served, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more unbelievable true stories that'll restore your faith in karma.